This is a brief discussion of my ideas on tattoos and other forms of self-mutilation common among members of the American herd today in post-mortem America. The first slide has a still from the movie version of Ray Bradbury's film The Illustrated Man, which came out back in 1970 or something like that, which has a picture of the star Rod Steiger lying on a bed, his body completely covered with tattoos. Okay. Record of a recent conversation about tattoos. Me. Nobody likes tattoos. Idiot. What about the people who wear them? Me. They don't like them either. Idiot. Then why do they wear them? Me. Because they don't like themselves and they want the world to know it. Conversation with a friend out west about New York City some years ago. Me. There are more tattoos on one city block in New York City than in all the trailer parks in Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee combined. It's like a whole city full of trailer trash, only without the trailers. Tattoos and self-mutilation exemplify somatic narcissism. Tattoos and the rest are forms of self-mutilation and self-scarification. It can be likened to borderlines who slash themselves with knives or razor blades to vent their self-hatred of themselves on their own bodies. And here's a quote from famous object relation theorist and therapist Otto Kernberg from his book Borderline Conditions and Pathological Narcissism. Quote, primitive self-destructiveness. There exists a low-level group of masochistic characters in which rather primitive sexualization of masochistic needs occurs. Masochistic perverse trends may be present, and aggression is discharged indiscriminately toward the outside or toward one's own body. Okay, emphasis on that last part. He's saying that some people exhibit these masochistic trends where if aggression cannot be vented out to the outside world onto a person or a thing or torturing their dog or something like that, they will direct it toward their own body. This is what tattoos and piercings and all this spiritual derangement, as Eric Keller would put it, that is going on today derives from. Aggression is discharged indiscriminately toward the outside or toward one's own body. Patients with severe self-destructiveness, but without a well-integrated superego, and with a remarkable absence of the capacity to experience guilt, are members of this group. Typical examples are provided by patients who obtain nonspecific relief of anxiety by cutting themselves or by some other form of self-mutilation or by impulsive suicidal gestures carried out with great rage and practically no depression. Unquote. In a sense, tattoos represent narcissist theater. They are emblems of the look at me contingent. In other words, the herd. The herd needs to reinforce its membership in the herd constantly via mirroring from other members of the herd. Tattoos are a sign and a mark of the other-oriented personality of our times. David Reisman talks about this in The Lonely Crowd. Also, Ellsworth F. Baker talks about it in his book, Man in the Trap. Sartre's tattoos and other forms of self-mutilation are akin to Sartre's discussion of the mustache in his first novel, Nausea. Phenomenon, self-correcting, self-mutilation in an intellectual form, I guess. Okay. Tattoos and other forms of self-mutilation are akin to Sartre's discussion of the mustache in his first novel, Nausea. Quote, for Sartre, a mustache becomes the emblem of unthinking men with no inner life. A man cannot see his own mustache, at least to the extent that others see it. So a mustache exists primarily for others, and a man with a mustache is a man who has undertaken to exist for others rather than for himself. Insofar as it is typical of the bourgeois to strive to be his social self, not his real self, which he has to go inside to hunt down and bring out, which these other directed, non-inner directed people are not capable of doing, or they run away from doing. For insofar as it is typical of the bourgeois to strive to be his social self, the mustache, for Sartre, becomes the emblem of the shallow, self-satisfied, respectable, reactionary, middle-class gentleman. From Sartre's La Nausée, quoted by Gary Cox in his wonderful book, How to Be an Existentialist. Unquote. As demonstrably a personality type which exists more for the other than for itself. I mean, that's what we're seeing in postmortem America today. And part of the reason this is happening is because of the spiritual derangement and loss of God psychosis that has resulted from the nihilism, the Hellerian nihilism that he talks about in his book. They're terrified to look at themselves or look inside themselves. They're terrified of contemplation because they might get in touch with the guilt and self-disgust over the death of God. The death of God within them. They don't look inside themselves because they might find the origins of God's death in themselves. This is especially true when the tattoos are on their backs, butt, or back of the neck. Tattoos just above their buttocks is the nape of their butts. Narcissism, but also, and more importantly, a mark of a member of the herd. People with tattoos have defiled themselves. The area around the tattoo is akin to a piece of partially rotted meat, with the tattoo representing the beginning of the rot. People with tattoos have unconscious fantasies of themselves rotting away, as in a out-of-control cancer of the entire body, or like a body being destroyed by leprosy. The ink of the tattoo seeps into the soul of the art object, that is, the tattooee, and makes them loathe themselves more and more and even more. The ink of the tattoo seeps deep into the wearer's soul. Piercing. It's like creating an artificial physical deformity where none existed before. It's like feeling deformed inside, emotionally and spiritually, and creating the outward physical manifestation to match the inward feeling and self-image. This is the very definition of expressionism in art. It's an outward symbol to simplify inner states of emotion and spirituality. A tattoo is a mark of a member of the herd, especially when they put it on their lower back or behind their neck. I am here for others first and not for myself. Another angle on tattoos, the mother smiling over the baby's crib angle. I just made that term up. If a person has a lousy mother who doesn't smile down at them in their crib enough when they are very young, reinforcing their developing sense of self, you see the genesis of the personality disorders. And I've said, in addition to being, a society that's in the grips of societal narcissism, an epidemic of society, I take it further. I'm saying you're actually seeing large groups of people all around the country who have more severe personality disorders than mere narcissism, like borderline personality disorder. And that's what borderlines do. In the quote above from Otto Kernberg, borderlines cut themselves and express their self-hatred at themselves. And that's what these people are symbolically doing, because a lot of people walking around normally are ambulatory, quasi-borderline personality disordered persons. If a person has a lousy mother who doesn't smile down at them in their crib enough when they are very young, reinforcing their developing sense of self and ego structure, you see the genesis of the personality disorders. An empathic, mirroring, accepting, affectionate face will reinforce development of a healthy ego structure. When such is lacking, they will grow up feeling ugly, with self-attacking self-objects implanted in their subconscious. Okay, now this talks about feminism and the effects that feminism has had on postmodern American society since the end of World War II. Because this talks about how women have become so resentful of men that they have become resentful of themselves. They see, subconsciously, there's a part of themselves that sees the traditional point of womanhood, which is motherhood, as a sign of their inferiority to men. It awakens their resentment toward men. So we're seeing growing numbers of these people walking around with narcissistic and other personality disordered traits. And in part, it's due to feminism, because it has reinforced women's self-disgust over being women and over experiencing penis envy. And subconsciously, they take it out on their infant children in the crib. Now, this may sound like an extreme kind of, psychoanalytic mumbo jumbo, but it's true. It's not mumbo jumbo, because, let me get my thought here. I lost my thought for a second. Oh, I lost it. When such is lacking, an empathic mirroring, accepting, affectionate face will reinforce development of a healthy ego structure. When such is lacking, they will grow up feeling ugly with self-attacking self-objects implanted in their subconscious. It's irrelevant how they look to other people. To themselves, they are ugly. This is why you'll see people, especially women, walking around who are like 9s or 10s on the scale of attractiveness or whatever, subjective scales, who look in the mirror and see ugly. They look in other people's eyes, and the male eyes, the male gaze may be looking them over like, wow, she's hot, but they're seeing a guy looking at them and thinking, wow, she's ugly. And this has engendered the Me Too movement and gender feminism and all this spiritual derangement from Hegelian nihilism. Okay? So if they make themselves ugly to look at by tattooing or piercing themselves, they can pretend that they have some control over their ugliness, such that they made themselves ugly because they want to. And if they didn't want to, they could make themselves attractive, but they just don't want to. Okay, it's a reaction formation against their feelings of self-disgust and ugliness. Not that they were made ugly to begin with. They get the tattoo and they can say to themselves, I'm not really ugly. I just appear ugly to you because of my tattoos, or whatever self-mutilation is their choice. I mean, and these people are so desperate to deal with these internal problems that they're literally putting bones through their noses and their septums. You see women walking around with the little pierce in their nose, and they're fancying that they're doing that because they fancy that they're unique and not conformist, because they've come up with the creative idea. They think that in the past, women put these rings in their ears, but they're putting it in their noses because they're nonconformists, so they think, and they identify with inferior cultures, which they are trying to elevate to egalitarian level with European cultures. They get the tattoo, and then they can say to themselves, I'm not really ugly, I just appear ugly to you because my tattoos or whatever, bones in the noses. I mean, it's getting insane. There are actually people who are drilling holes into their skull and walking around with a hole in their skull, desperate to try to be unique and desperate to vent this self-destructiveness onto their bodies. It's self-destructiveness in stages. A person commits suicide, the ultimate form of self-destruction, by taking a knife and stabbing themselves in the throat, right? But if they don't have the nerve to do that, or they don't have the rage enough to completely self-destruct, they can do it in little symbolic gestures and statements. And that's what this phenomena is in postmodern America today. They get a tattoo and they can say to themselves, I'm not really ugly. I just appear ugly to you because of my tattoos. If I had them removed, you wouldn't think I was ugly. So it's a reaction formation to try to gain power over what they're misperceiving in other people as these other people perceiving them as being ugly. A tattoo is like a mark of Cain, but self-inflicted, like a self-inflicted sign of self-disgust and self-loathing. My skin isn't alive anymore. My skin has become a dead thing, so I can mutilate it. My flesh is not alive. The Nazis tattooed members of the Waffen SS under their left armpit so they could identify them post-combat if they needed to. Tattoos are expressionist. They are metaphors for the person's internal emotional states. Tattoos represent impurity. They're like a pollution of the flesh, a body pollution, like a visible external sign of an internal illness. A tattoo is a loss of the purity of the skin. It's expressionist symbolism for the impurity of the soul of the tattooee. Tattoos, piercings are for non-conforming conformists, which you can call them. Many people who practice these subtler forms of self-mutilation are doing so to tell the world around them that they are non-conforming, unique, and special. It's more slave ache, desperate for specialness, so they can stand out from the herd while staying in the herd and benefiting from the safety and security of being in the herd. What they fail to notice is that they are in fact conforming, just not to the greater society as a whole, but to pseudo-rebelling subsets of the population. After all, they didn't wake up one morning as children and say, "Can I get decals on my skin that are permanent little paintings?" I will go out into the world and find someone who will help me figure out how to poke ink into my skin to make mini pictures that won't wash off when it rains. They are motivated to do it because they see other people doing it. Their nonconformity is fake. Conformity is about being accepted by some group, to mask feelings of insecurity or being habituated to loneliness. They perform perverse acts like getting tattooed to be accepted by the group, which they might not perform if left to their own devices. For many post-mortem Americans, tattoos are pseudo-rebellion. Pseudo-individuality is proof positive that these people are not different but very much the same. Very much conformist slaves and members of the herd. Their emphatic insistence on showing the world that they are true individuals helps to hide their guilt over being members of the herd. They are emphatically members of the herd because they never bother to step back from themselves and take a look around. They're afraid. I've said before that when I'm walking the streets of New York and I see the masses of people walking together, they brush up against me unwittingly, or on the subway, they squeeze into a seat and lean back when they don't have to lean back, and they're touching you. And I lean forward because I don't want you to. Why do you have to lean back? Why can't you lean forward? And they have lack of body awareness because they have lack of internal awareness, because they have lack of external awareness. They're not interested in the world or in life because they're interested in creating a pseudo-identity for themselves because they lack a sense of identity. So what I've said many times is that the herd in bunches kind of resemble a school of fish or a flock of birds. You know, the school of fish swims around, hundreds of them, but they move as a group. And they brush against themselves or against others, and there's no perception whatsoever of this physical feeling. They're afraid of what they are emphatically members of the herd because they never bother to step back from themselves and take a look around. They're afraid of what they would see. They affect sincere individuality as a request for acceptance from the group. It's like the scene in the film Midnight Cowboy, where Joe Buck from Texas moves to New York believing he'll make it rich as a stud because he dresses like a cowboy and would stand out as exotic in New York City. Then when he's totally broke, takes a walk around 7th Avenue and finds dozens more failed fake cowboy studs, also broken down on their luck, that he has an epiphany about himself, that he has a revelation, and he starts to begin a new quest for finding a true identity, which results in him going down to Florida and working a real career as a landscape gardener, whatever, which in the end of the movie he enjoys, and he's found himself. Nothing special, just something that gives him fulfillment and puts food on the table. You can't offend anyone in our society anymore by calling them freaks. It's funny. They prefer thinking of themselves as freaks. Why? So they won't feel so much a part of the herd so much all the time. It's herd bad conscience, a form of pretend rebellion. Pretend protest by members of the herd against their herdness. Superficial, phony rebellion, individuality for people so terrified of true individuality. True individuality would have them alone too much. Alone terrifies members, alone, quote unquote, terrifies members of the herd. It's pseudo-rebellion for conformists with a bad conscience about being conformists, which is what is happening in most of America today, in most of post-mortem America today. Tattoos and fishhooks through the nostrils. These people are completely other-directed. No actions or behaviors are self-directed because they have no true sense of self. They're broadcasting and advertising for someone to mirror back a self to them so they can try it on for size and see if it fits. It never does. Sociological study of narcissism. This is research that needs to be done in the near future. What does self-psychology say about tattoos? This is just a question to myself about expanding these ideas further in the future. Notes from Otto Kernberg's Borderline Conditions and Pathological Narcissism. It's a great book if you're fond of psychobabble, which I am, because I see it has applications everywhere around me that I look, in reality. Another way of looking at tattoos is as brands, as in cows and other barnyard or stock animals. People who tattoo themselves are making a statement. The statement is, I am a barnyard animal. There was this waiter working at the Uptown French Roast I used to go to a lot when I lived on the Upper West Side. He had a tattoo of a barcode on his wrist. I asked him about it. I could not believe that somebody would do it. What's the existential piece? The existential piece is what he's subconsciously saying about himself. And what he's subconsciously saying about himself is, I'm a member of the herd. I'm so conformist that I'm like a robotic machine. You can stamp me with a barcode, and that's my identity. Because at least the barcode that I've tattooed on my wrist will distinguish me from other people. This is what happens in the fantasy of these people. Then I saw another and another and another. One chick had a similar barcode tattooed right across the nape of her neck. What is the message these people are trying to send? Spiritual derangement of Hellerian nihilistic people. A tattoo is an act of suicide in small stages. It's masochism. It's self-mutilation. It's reaction formation against feeling ugly. It's an emblem of the herd. Conformity. It's expressionist art, deforming their outward appearance to express their inner deformity. Identify backward. They want to also identify backward with inferior societies, results of Heller, pain and poverty and suffering and death. I went out with this girl from Arizona a few years ago for a while. She was very, very young, and we were arguing about tattoos one day. She played alto sax, and we had a lot of things in common, but she was offended when I said that tattoos, are disgusting, and people, that was actually the conversation that I quoted above about me, an idiot, they hate themselves. I had this conversation with this woman. And she started to saying, well, people in the Amazon and tribal cultures have them. And I'm like, so? Why do you feel you have to sympathize or pity these backward people? I mean, it's one thing to just leave them alone and say, that's who they are, we don't need to bother them, let them alone, rather than conquering them like we did with the Plains Indians, in the 19th century under Manifest Destiny when we were conquering the continent, okay? But it's another to have some weird special sympathy with them and try to identify with them. What's the point of that? There's something very disturbing about that, okay? These people wipe their asses with their hands. Right? Do people who sympathize with these backward tribal cultures want to live, in lacking such, degree of civilization that they want to start, pulling their panties off, squatting in a field somewhere, shitting? I call it squat shitting because that's what most of the world does. outside of Western European societies, and then wiping their ass with their hands. They have to be very careful, like Arabian tribes, like the Bedouin, who have very strict cultural norms about because they eat with their right hand and they wipe their ass with their left hand. And if you visit, and I've seen this happen, if you visit some Bedou, in the Middle East, people will warn you, don't touch them with your left hand and don't touch food with your left hand. At some level, to some degree, tattoos and piercings are a reinforcement of our society's bogus morality. And that's what these people who sympathize with the tribal morality, they're also they're trying to put out phony morality and righteousness. Sympathy with tribal people because they are picked on and oppressed. Also to make a statement supporting the theory of their equality with us, their conquerors. If we were able to conquer them, is that fact not simple, clear, prima facie evidence that in somewhat important ways they are inferior to us, and some other important ways we are superior to them? This goes back to this whole bullshit about white supremacy. And, as I have been saying, and everybody knows this but won't admit it, every person on this planet is a white supremacist. The most intense white supremacists are non-whites on the planet. Tattoos are also infantilism in decaying societies, extended adolescence, tattoos, etc., expressionism. These people refuse to grow up and direct their lives towards something serious besides playing around with their appearance. Comic book stores all over the place replacing real bookstores. Primetime adult cartoons, graphic novels and graphic books in general, skateboarding, and most of all, pinball. Going back to Tommy the Who by Tommy. Tommy by the Who.